The letter from the licensing board arrived on a Thursday morning. I almost didn't open it immediately. I had seen licensing board correspondence before, routine renewal notices, continuing education confirmations, the standard administrative mail that comes with holding a professional license. I set it on my kitchen counter, poured my coffee, and opened it while standing up because I assumed it would take 30 seconds to read. It took 30 seconds, but nothing about the next 3 months was routine. The letter informed me that a formal complaint had been filed against my license by a client who described 11 months of services rendered, 11 months of appointments, 11 months of sessions, 11 months of signed documents and invoices and professional correspondence, all under my name, all under my license number, none of it performed by me. I had never spoken to this client in my life. I had never met them, never scheduled an appointment with them, never invoiced them for a single session. I set my coffee cup down. I picked the letter back up and read it again from the beginning. The client's complaint described services that were, in every measurable way, exactly what I do for a living. The dates were real, the location was real, a practice address 40 minutes from my apartment that I had never set foot in. My name was on every document. My license number was on every document. My signature, or something close enough to my signature that a licensing board intake coordinator had logged the complaint without flagging anything unusual, was on every document. I am a licensed professional counselor. My sister failed her licensing exam twice, and for 11 months, she had been practicing under my credentials. In about 70 minutes, you are going to understand everything. How I found out, what the licensing board did, what my sister said when I confronted her, and what I chose, carefully, precisely, without screaming once, to do about it. But first, you need to understand who we are, because this didn't start with the licensing board letter. It started 27 years earlier in a house where one daughter was told she was the smart one and the other was told she was the caring one, and both of us spent our entire adult lives trying to prove the other label wrong. My name is Dara. I'm 32 years old. I live in Denver, Colorado, where I have a small private practice as a licensed professional counselor. I specialize in family systems and trauma, which, given what I'm about to tell you, is either deeply ironic or exactly right, depending on how you look at it. I became a therapist because I understood, from a very young age, that the way families organize themselves creates patterns that people carry for decades without realizing it. I wanted to work with those patterns. I wanted to help people see the water they were swimming in. I was good at seeing things. I was less good for a long time at seeing what was happening in my own family. My sister's name is Priya. She's 35, 3 years older than me. We grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, in a household that operated, without anyone explicitly stating this, around the premise that Priya was the creative, relational one, and I was the academic, achievement-oriented. These were not cruel labels. They were offered with love, the way most damaging family labels are. My mother praised Priya's empathy. She praised my test scores. My father talked about Priya's social intelligence. He talked about my work ethic. What this produced, over 27 years, was 2 daughters who were each trying to inhabit the other one's territory. Priya decided in her early 30s that she wanted to become a licensed professional counselor. This was not a surprising decision. It made sense, given her history, her values, her genuine skill with people. I supported it. I shared resources. I helped her understand the coursework requirements and the supervised hours and the exam structure. She completed the coursework. She did not pass the exam. She took it the first time 18 months ago. She scored below the threshold. She was disappointed, but not devastated. First attempts have a specific failure rate, and she knew that going in. She studied again. She took it a second time 8 months ago. She did not pass again. This is where I want to be careful, because I don't want to be cruel about something that is genuinely hard. Failing a licensing exam twice is demoralizing. It calls into question a path you've committed to. It brings up every old family label, the smart one, the not smart one, in ways that are painful regardless of how old you are. I called Priya after the second result. I was supportive. I told her about the resources available, the additional study programs, the option of requesting a score analysis. I told her the exam had a relatively high retake success rate with targeted preparation. She thanked me. She said she was going to take some time to decide what to do next. What she decided to do next is what brought a licensing board complaint to my kitchen counter on a Thursday morning. What she decided to do next is practice under my license and bill clients for 11 months of services I never provided. In the weeks after the licensing board letter arrived, I reconstructed a timeline. This is what therapists do with complex information. We organize it. We find the pattern. We identify when things began and how they developed. The timeline began approximately 9 months after Priya's second failed exam. She had found a supervisor, not through the board. She didn't have a license, so she had no board-approved supervisor. She found a private practice owner in Scottsdale who needed an associate-level clinician and who, apparently, did not verify credentials with the thoroughness that verification requires. Priya had applied for the associate position using a credential packet that included my license number. Not her own, mine. She had my license number because I had shared it with her during her exam preparation. It appeared on a sample document I had walked her through to explain the format of professional paperwork. She had written it down. She had my signature because I had signed a reference letter for her grad school application 4 years earlier. She had kept a copy. She had constructed, from those two pieces, enough documentation to pass a superficial employment credential check. The practice owner, I will not name her or the practice because she is herself a victim of fraud in this situation, had logged Priya's credential verification as complete and began scheduling clients. For 11 months, Priya had been seeing clients, providing counseling services, and billing them under my name and license number. The clients believed they were working with me. The practice owner believed she had hired a licensed counselor whose credentials had been verified, and I, 40 minutes away in Denver, had no idea any of it was happening. The complaint that triggered the licensing board letter was from a client who had, after 11 months of working with Priya, done something that I think reflects well on their thoroughness and poorly on how long the situation went undetected. They had Googled my name to find out more about my professional background. They had found my actual website, my Denver practice website, with my bio and my specialty areas, and realized that the person described there did not match the person they had been seeing for 11 months in Scottsdale. They had filed a complaint. Not against Priya, they didn't know Priya's name, against me, the name on their paperwork. And the licensing board had sent a letter to the address on my license registration, which is my Denver apartment, which is where it arrived on a Thursday morning when I was drinking coffee and expecting nothing. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. How does someone practice under another person's credentials for 11 months without anyone noticing? The answer is a combination of inadequate verification processes, a supervision structure that was less rigorous than it should have been, and a sister who understood enough about how professional paperwork works to construct something plausible. None of that is a comfort, but it is the answer. And the second question you might be thinking, did I have any idea, any suspicion, any moment where something felt off? No. Not one, which is its own particular kind of thing to sit with. In the weeks after the licensing board letter arrived, I reconstructed a timeline. This is what therapists do with complex information. We organize it. We find the pattern. We identify when things began and how they developed. The timeline began approximately 9 months after Priya's second failed exam. She had found a supervisor, not through the board. She didn't have a license, so she had no board-approved supervisor. She found a private practice owner in Scottsdale who needed an associate-level clinician and who, apparently, did not verify credentials with the thoroughness that verification requires. Priya had applied for the associate position using a credential packet that included my license number. Not her own, mine. She had my license number because I had shared it with her during her exam preparation. It appeared on a sample document I had walked her through to explain the format of professional paperwork. She had written it down. She had my signature because I had signed a reference letter for her grad school application 4 years earlier. She had kept a copy. She had constructed, from those two pieces, enough documentation to pass a superficial employment credential check. The practice owner, I will not name her or the practice because she is herself a victim of fraud in this situation, had logged Priya's credential verification as complete and began scheduling clients. For 11 months, Priya had been seeing clients, providing counseling services, and billing them under my name and license number. The clients believed they were working with me. The practice owner believed she had hired a licensed counselor whose credentials had been verified, and I, 40 minutes away in Denver, had no idea any of it was happening. The complaint that triggered the licensing board letter was from a client who had, after 11 months of working with Priya, done something that I think reflects well on their thoroughness and poorly on how long the situation went undetected. They had Googled my name to find out more about my professional background. They had found my actual website, my Denver practice website, with my bio and my specialty areas, and realized that the person described there did not match the person they had been seeing for 11 months in Scottsdale. They had filed a complaint, not against Priya, they didn't know Priya's name, against me, the name on their paperwork. And the licensing board had sent a letter to the address on my license registration, which is my Denver apartment, which is where it arrived on a Thursday morning when I was drinking coffee and expecting nothing. I want to pause here because I know what some of you are thinking. How does someone practice under another person's credentials for 11 months without anyone noticing? The answer is a combination of inadequate verification processes, a supervision structure that was less rigorous than it should have been, and a sister who understood enough about how professional paperwork works to construct something plausible. None of that is a comfort, but it is the answer. And the second question you might be thinking, did I have any idea, any suspicion, any moment where something felt off? No, not one. Which is its own particular kind of thing to sit with. Right here, I have the letter. I have the phone call. I know everything. And now I have to decide, with my license, my career, and my sister's entire professional future all in the same room together, what I am going to do. Because here is what you don't know yet. When I contacted the licensing board to report that I was the victim of credential fraud, that someone had practiced under my license without my authorization, they told me something that changed the shape of everything. They told me that how I reported it and what I reported and the documentation I provided would determine not just what happened to my sister, but what happened to me. My license was at risk regardless of whether I reported or not. What I did in the next 72 hours would determine whether I walked out of this with my career intact. Before I tell you what I did, if this story is reaching something real, if you have ever had someone use your name, your reputation, your professional identity for their own benefit without your consent, hit subscribe right now. I make stories like this every single week about family, about identity, about what it costs to be the capable one in a family where capability is quietly treated as a resource that belongs to everyone. Subscribe, and then stay, because what I did in those 72 hours is the reason I still have my license today. I called an attorney within the hour. Not a family law attorney, a professional licensing defense attorney, a specific subspecialty that I had once researched for a client situation and whose existence I had filed away, the way therapists file away useful information without knowing when they'll need it. Her name was Carolyn. She had handled licensing board complaints for healthcare professionals for 18 years. Within 30 minutes of explaining the situation, she had given me the clearest, most useful summary of my position that I could have received. "The complaint is against you because your name is on the paperwork," she said. "The board doesn't know yet that you're the victim. You need to make that clear before they proceed any further with the complaint investigation." "What do I need to provide?" "Everything that establishes you were not there. Appointment calendars, client records from your Denver practice, credit card statements, anything that puts you in Denver on dates when services were rendered in Scottsdale. And then you need to file a credential fraud report with the board simultaneously." "If I file the fraud report, what happens to my sister?" A pause. Carolyn is not a person who softens things unnecessarily, which is exactly what I needed. "She will almost certainly face criminal fraud charges. Practicing without a license is a felony in Arizona. Using someone else's credentials to do so adds identity fraud. This is serious." "And if I don't file the fraud report?" "Then the complaint proceeds against your license, and you spend the next year trying to explain why you have no records of 11 months of clients. The board will investigate whether you maintained dual practice without proper notification. Your license is at real risk." I sat with that. "Is there any middle ground?" "There is," she said. "You filed the credential fraud report, which protects you and establishes the truth. The criminal process from there is not in your control. The board will refer it to the state attorney general. You can write a separate letter to the board supporting a measured response, noting your sister's history, her exam failures, the context. That letter may influence how the situation is handled at the prosecutorial level. But you cannot not file the fraud report and keep your license. I need you to understand that." I understood that. I spent the next 48 hours doing what Carolyn had outlined. I pulled 2 years of appointment calendars from my Denver practice management software. I compiled credit card statements showing my Denver purchases on every date services had been rendered in Scottsdale. I wrote a detailed chronological account of what I knew about Priya's actions, when I found out, and how, with the timestamps from the licensing board letter and the phone call with Priya both documented. I also called my parents. That call was in some ways harder than the call with Priya. My mother picked up. I told her what happened. Not all of it. The emotional texture of it would take months to convey. But the facts. The licensing board letter, Priya practicing under my credentials, my license at risk, the attorney, the fraud report I was going to file. My mother's first response, and I want to be honest about this because it is the most revealing thing in the story about the family dynamic that made all of it possible, was, "Can you fix it quietly without the formal report? Can you fix it quietly? Can you absorb this too? Can you protect your sister from the consequences of what she did to you, the way you have always protected everyone from the consequences of everything?" "No, Mom," I said. "I can't. My license is at stake. I have to file the report." "But what will happen to Priya?" "Mom," I kept my voice steady, "what Priya did could end my career. I need you to understand that. She used my identity to practice therapy without a license for 11 months. She put real clients at risk. She put me at risk. The report is not optional." Silence. Then quietly, I know you're right." She was crying, the real kind. "I know," she said again. She wanted it so badly. The career, the license. She wanted to be..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I knew what Priya had wanted to be. She wanted to be the smart one. And I understood that, in its own way, better than anyone. I filed the credential fraud report on a Friday morning. Carolyn submitted it with my complete documentation package. And then I wrote a second letter, the one Carolyn had mentioned, addressed to the licensing board, that I think I want to tell you about, because I think it's the most important thing I did in those 72 hours. The letter stated the facts of the situation as I understood them. It stated that I was filing the fraud report because I had a legal and ethical obligation to do so, and because the protection of clients who had been seen under false credentials required it. It stated that I understood the professional and criminal consequences for my sister, and that I was not filing the report out of malice. And then it said one thing that I had thought about for 48 hours before I wrote it. I am asking the board to consider in its proceedings that the person who committed this fraud did so out of a desperation born from a credentialing system that had twice failed to adequately assess her genuine clinical skills. She was wrong to do what she did. She harmed me. She potentially harmed clients. These are facts, and they coexist with the fact that she is a person who genuinely wanted to help people and found no legitimate path to do so. I'm not asking for leniency on my behalf. I'm asking for the complexity of the situation to be held. I sent both documents on Friday. I did not call Priya to tell her. The licensing board's response to my fraud report arrived within 10 business days. They acknowledged my complaint. They confirmed that the investigation of the complaint against my license would be suspended pending review of my documentation. They noted that a separate investigation into the credential fraud would be opened. They also confirmed that the matter had been referred to the Arizona Attorney General's office. Carolyn had prepared me for this. The referral was expected. What it meant, practically, was that the criminal dimension of what Priya had done was now in the hands of prosecutors rather than in mine. I had done what I could do. The rest was no longer my responsibility. I called Priya once more after the report was filed. I told her what I had done. I told her that the matter had been referred to the Attorney General. I told her she needed to retain an attorney immediately and that I would not be advising her on how to proceed. She was crying before I finished the first sentence. "Dara, please, can't you—" "No," I said. "I can't. And I need you to hear me say this because I've thought very carefully about it. I love you. And I filed that report. Both of those things are true, and they are not in conflict." "How can you say that?" "Because protecting myself is not the same as attacking you. What you did put my license at risk. Reporting the fraud is how I protect what I spent 9 years building. You would do the same." Silence. "I'm not angry at you," I said. "I'm not going to pretend I'm not hurt, but I'm not angry. What I am is clear. Clear about what I did and why. Clear that I'm not going to absorb this to protect you from it. That's what I'm done with. Absorbing things to protect people from the consequences of what they've done to me." She didn't say anything. "Get a lawyer," I said. "A good one." I hung up. I made tea. I went for a walk. And I noticed, somewhere on that walk, that I felt not happy, not relieved exactly, not at peace, but solid. The specific solidity of a person who has done the right thing in a situation where the right thing cost something real. That feeling was new. I wanted to keep it. The fallout moved through my family and professional network in different directions simultaneously. My parents, both of them, in the weeks after I filed the report, moved through a sequence I recognized from my clinical work. Denial first, then anger at the situation rather than at Priya, then a period of quiet that I understood as processing, then something more honest. My father called me about 3 weeks after the report. He is not an emotional talker. He communicates in practical frames, and I have always known this and worked around it. He said, "I looked into what she did, the licensing laws, the fraud statutes. I didn't understand. I don't think your mother understood the seriousness of what she was asking you to overlook when she said to fix it quietly." I know you didn't, I said. What she asked you to do, to protect Priya at the cost of your own career, that's not something I'm proud that she asked, that we've always asked of you. I held the phone very still. I've been thinking about that, he said. The pattern of it. How many times that's been the ask? Yes, I said. I'm sorry, he said, for the pattern, not just for this. My father apologized for the pattern, not for a single incident, for the pattern. I don't have adequate words for what that meant to receive. The practice owner in Scottsdale, once she understood the full situation, cooperated entirely with the licensing board investigation. She had been defrauded as much as I had. Her practice had employed someone under false credentials. She was herself facing scrutiny from the board for inadequate verification procedures, and her cooperation was in part self-protective. But she also called me once, personally, to say she was sorry, that she had trusted the documentation she was given, that she hoped my license would be protected. The licensing board, after reviewing my documentation, closed the complaint against my license. Not suspended, closed, finding in my favor, a formal determination that I had not engaged in the conduct described in the complaint. The criminal fraud investigation and the criminal referral to the Arizona Attorney General proceeded without my involvement. Priya retained an attorney. I do not know, as of this recording, the precise outcome of the criminal proceedings. The process is slow, and I have deliberately kept some distance from the details on Caroline's advice to protect my own position. What I do know is that Priya is not practicing anywhere right now. She has not attempted to contact clients. She is, by her own account, in the one call we had 6 weeks after everything began, working with her attorney and working in therapy. Working in therapy. That part I did not expect. She told me she had started seeing a counselor, a licensed one, and she said with a humility that I had not heard from her in all 35 years of knowing her, I'm starting to understand why I did it. I don't mean that as an excuse. I mean, I'm starting to actually see it. Good, I said. I'm sorry, Dara. I'm genuinely sorry. Not because of what happened to me, because of what I did to you. I believed her. Not completely, not in the way that makes everything all right, but enough to know that something real was happening in her, something that the crisis had cracked open in ways that 11 years of trying to prove the family label wrong had not. Has anyone ever been the person in your family that everyone else expected to absorb their mistakes? The one who everyone assumed would find a way to make it okay? Tell me in the comments, because I think there are a lot of us, and I think we spend a lot of years absorbing before we figure out that absorbing is a choice we've been making without fully realizing we're making it. It has been 9 months since the licensing board letter arrived on my kitchen counter. My license is intact. My practice is intact. My clients are intact. The career I spent 9 years building, that my sister spent 11 months using without my knowledge, still belongs to me. That is not a small thing. I know that. I felt it the morning Carolyn called to tell me the complaint had been closed. I sat at my kitchen table, the same coffee, the same Thursday morning quality of light, and I held the phone, and I felt it. I also started therapy. This surprises people sometimes when I mention it. I am a therapist. Surely I have access to all of the tools. Surely I understand the mechanisms of what happened well enough to process it without external support. I understand the mechanisms the way an ER physician understands illness. Understanding the mechanism and experiencing the healing are not the same process. My therapist, Dr. Song, who has a dry humor and a precision that I appreciate, introduced me early on to a framework I have been sitting with for months. She calls it the competence trap, the idea that high-functioning people in dysfunctional families become so reliably competent that the family stops being able to see their vulnerability, not because the competence is false, it's real, but because competence, deployed consistently and without complaint, trains the people around you to stop asking if you're okay, to stop checking if you need anything, to start treating your capability as a given rather than a choice. Priya had been trained by our family as thoroughly as I had to see my competence as a resource. She had borrowed from it the way you borrow from a resource, without thinking of it belonging to a person. That is the family's failure as much as hers. It is also a pattern I am responsible for having allowed to continue for 32 years without naming it. Not because it was my fault, because I had the power to name it and didn't. I am naming it now. I want to say something to you directly. If you are the competent one in your family, the one with the clean credit, the stable income, the professional license, the reputation that other people have learned they can borrow without asking, I want you to hear this. Your capability is yours, not your family's, not your siblings, not your parents' safety net or your spouse's backup plan or anyone else's resource to draw from without your explicit, informed, ongoing consent. Your name is yours. Your license is yours. Your professional reputation, the thing you spent years building through hard work and sacrifice, belongs to you. And you are allowed to protect it, even from the people you love. Especially from the people you love. Because the people who love us have the most access to what we've built, and love does not automatically come with respect for what that access should and should not be used for. Maybe you're living a version of this. Maybe your version isn't a professional license. Maybe it's your credit score being used without your permission, or your reputation being leveraged, or your name being attached to something you didn't agree to by someone who assumed your competence meant you could handle the fallout. Maybe you've been handling fallout for years. I want you to know that handling it is a choice, and you can make a different one. One final question before I go. If a licensing board letter had arrived at your door with your name on it for something your sibling did, would you have filed the report, or would you have tried to find a way to protect them and fix it quietly? Pay or boundary? Tell me in the comments, because I think this question cuts to something real about how each of us balance love and self-protection in families that have confused the two. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button. Share it with someone who is the capable one in a family that has started treating their capability as a community resource. And subscribe, because I'll be here next week with another one. There's a story in the description I think you'll need just as much as this one. I'll see you in the next one.